If you are not moving forward and exploring and learning and discovering, you are falling backwards. We want peace, and we want a future that trends with less violence.
Didn't know what time it was, the lights were low.
Know thy enemy, know thyself. And if you are deceived in your own arrogance and your own dominance of the past, that what you did in the past is sufficient to win in the future, eventually you're going to be a dead man. And this Constitution that America has is the best hope of humanity. We have the creativity. God has given us the brains to create our future, to build it. The way to do that is not to ignore a new domain and new technologies. How do we use this knowledge God has given us to glorify God and not let evil people use it as a weapon against good people? We don't have to be victims. Technology does change fate. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Space Revolution. I am very excited to have as my co-host Dr. David Stuckenberg. This is every few seasons or every few episodes I bring on the titans of industry who are building the future, and David is one of them. David, welcome. So
David, good to hear.
Yeah, good to hear you too. And David is, a man on the run, moving from airport to airport. So I think he's at the Tulsa airport right now. But I want to just remind our listeners that Dr. Stuckenberg is a man who was given a vision by God on how to solve the world water problem. And he started a company and has ushered in the very first capability to draw water out of the air sustainably, kind to Mother Nature and kind to Mother Earth. And I'm going to have him tell his story. But this program today is about how the space revolution, meaning what we can do in space, unlocks a tremendous number of solutions to human problems that have been plaguing the human race since the beginning of time. Just like the internet opened up the entire opportunity for a smartphone, so too the space revolution is going to open up for Dr. Stuckenberg what he has invented for the human race with regard to water. So David, again, thank you, and make sure you can hear us okay.
I can hear you fine. How about you and me?
Yep. Yeah, it's loud and clear. So what I'd like you to do, Dave, is I've got a number of images to show people, but I'd like to kind of just start with you telling the story, that kind of the genesis of Genesis, if you're willing.
Happy to, and thanks for having me on today, Steve. Genesis recognition that our infrastructure, what we sustain ourselves with, is becoming increasingly delivered just in time and brittle. And so the way I like to describe it is that on by nature or by design, sometimes people understand how to take out the batteries from civilization and our infrastructure, and or intervenes. And so with the understanding that we're becoming very brittle,
All right, everybody, I've asked Dave to take a look and see if he can get to some Wi-Fi or a better connection. He's at the Tulsa airport right now. But what I'm going to do is kind of tee up kind of the cause and effect here. So, for example, what my company is doing, Space Built, is building large infrastructure in space. And when you can do that, and I'll show this image here that you've seen before if you've watched other episodes of what we've done here. But this is an example of a Starship delivering a factory that has all kinds of Lego blocks in it. And these Lego blocks can build a structure in space as large as you want. to do just about anything you want using robotics and laser communication, so the engineers can work from the ground to manipulate the AI-powered machine learning and mechanics and robotic arms that put together things in space, so that we build satellites in space for space qualification. We don't build them on Earth, which cuts out most of the cost, both of insurance and of building something so rugged it can survive the violent launch into space. And this way you can also build a satellite in a day, because all these Lego parts are very resilient, and you don't have to build the satellite inside the factory. As you can see here, you can build it out in open space, and these satellites move, maneuver. They can see threats, both electromagnetic threats and kinetic threats, and move out of the way. And it allows you to truly maintain an infrastructure in space to do some of these things. So once you can do this, then you can do the following. And this is something we talked about in one of our last episodes. You can build a constellation of solar receptors that then can convert the infinite power of the sun into radio waves that are as safe for humans as AM, FM radio, beam them to any point on the Earth or multiple points simultaneously to power anything, whether it's a home, a ship, a car, a plane, or infrastructure, or these water generators. So what Dave Stuckenberg has done, and what he's going to share with you when he gets back on here, is that he has developed a system that truly was a gift from God. And I hope, when you hear his story about how he got this vision as a combat pilot over the deserts of Afghanistan and flying into the UAE and Qatar, he had this vision of what needed to be done to solve the problem of water. And he has solved it. So this is what he offers. It's called a WaterCube. Now, this is the small version for individual use or home use. He has a version that is for hospitals that delivers 1,000 gallons a day. And he has a version for cities that can deliver hundreds of millions of gallons a day. And I'll play a short video for you that kind of gives you a testimonial. One of the gentlemen operating David Stuckenberg's machine in Hawaii has demonstrated, it has given a little testimony here. So I'll show you this testimony right now if you'll listen to this. Here we go. Okay, so that system that he had right there is a system that delivers about 2,000 or 200 gallons a day for somebody who is essentially needing water for their home. So I'll go ahead and bring Dave back up here. I think he's got some better internet connection here, and I'll get rid of that last one here, and we'll go ahead and go with Dave. Dave, here you go. You're back on stage.
Hi, Steve. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm back with you, and I have a better signal now.
Good. What I did is I showed them that when the space infrastructure builds these satellites that can deliver energy from the sun infinitely and sustainably to any point on Earth using radio waves, they can power your water machines. And I showed them the video from the Hawaiian customer that had his WaterCube about the size of his air conditioner, and I showed him a picture off of Amazon of that rugged man that has his WaterCube that he takes on the back of his Toyota truck anywhere he goes to be able to deliver water using solar power or the truck's engine energy, no matter what. So why don't we start?
That's right.
I told him that this was really a gift from God to you, and you're one of these mighty men of our age. Industrialist that is building the future, and over to you to kind of share your story.
Well, thanks, and appreciate your forbearance through the technical difficulties. So, as I was saying before the connection went bad, our civilization is increasingly brittle. We operate on a pacemaker where it's just-in-time electric, just-in-time water, just-in-time food, and it's very brittle. And so I became very familiar with this working in the nuclear treaty community. I became familiar with things like EMP weapons, weapons of mass destruction. I was involved in treaty compliance between Russia and the United States. And these are things that, are strategic in nature. Obviously, they have timelines associated with them that are able to impact generations, populations, impacting tens of thousands and potentially millions of people, and large geographies. So that's what we mean by strategic. And so in understanding that an adversary or nature can interrupt those things, it's very important that we pay attention to essentially creating breaker switches or opportunities for ourselves so that those things can't be swept out from under us. And so as part of initiatives for the Department of Defense and others, I became, I moved from operations on the flying side and on the operations side in the Air Force into the strategy side. And as we began to connect the dots, you realize that one of the easiest places to aggress and bend a nation's will and to create a situation where we can be forced to make a decision, for our values or our life. The lever that can be used is water. One of the easiest. Water as a weapon of mass destruction. And so we actually see that for one of the first times in our generation, and perhaps one of the most recent examples in modern history, where we have right now about 62 million people on the Arabian or the Persian Gulf who are surviving on just-in-time water. And so you asked for the story, the genesis of Genesis. And this is the recognition that I had, the kind of epiphany in 2016. I was flying combat missions out of Al Udeid Air Base. And every morning I would come back from Afghanistan and flying, and I would see off the right wing of my aircraft tanker trucks lined up, kind of disappearing into the distance. And I wanted to understand, what are those tanker trucks there for? What are they doing? And I would ask around, nobody seemed to know. And I finally would discover they were actually pumping out of one of the last aquifers in the country. Well, if you know anything about groundwater, it takes, thousands of years, hundreds of years to put that water down there. And now increasingly, as humanity puts more and more pressure on our water supplies, if it's digital or tangible, water is involved, right? It takes about 3,000 gallons of water to produce a cell phone, about 400 gallons of water to produce my shirt. And so everything we do as we reach for a higher level of living, a higher standard of living worldwide, puts pressure on the water supply. And this country in particular that I was operating out of was drawing theirs off. It was one of the last ground deposits of water, and they were pouring it out on palm trees to irrigate with. And that struck me as unimportant because it was a strategic water supply. But at the same time, the whole nation state of about 3.5 million people was dependent on desalinization. And that's when, I was standing in a conversation with myself, actually folding socks is the way I tell the story. And it was like somebody hit me with a book, and all of it was there, what to do and how to design an infrastructure that could withstand the test of time if it was hit from nature, if it was hit from a man-made attack, and that we needed to integrate that immediately. And so we began to bring leaders together in the United States to form that that core team and bring that vision to light. And so when you're young, you think you can make everything happen through your youthful energy and your strength. And when you get older, you realize that a lot of what we can accomplish is actually done through teamwork, obviously, and through our network and through wisdom, right, which is knowing how to do it. And so we brought that team of wisdom together and formed Genesis Systems. And I'll never forget one of the early technical experts who was advising on our team was Phil Summerall, who was the first program director at Artemis. And Phil's background was on the Werner von Braun team. And he and I had become good friends during my undergrad years. He came on a NASA visit to the university I was at, and we got to know each other just by accident, and we kept in touch. And he's one of the first phone calls I made. And I said, Phil, I had an idea. And I knew that idea wasn't my own. I knew that it was a deposit, if you would, from, God, in my view. I'm a person of faith, to entrust an idea to me, and that I needed to do something with it. And so the first thing I did is I reached into that network, and I called Phil, and I trusted him. And I said, Phil, what does this sound like to you? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, it sounds very important. It was July 2016. And he said, as soon as you get back from that deployment, come see me. So by September 2016, I was in Huntsville, Alabama, in front of a group of NASA engineers, some active, some retired. And I'll never forget kind of the almost skepticism going into the room. Everybody had signed NDAs, and one of them, who is he now owns a space company named Jason Hunley, he kind of put his hand on me, and he's like, if I had a nickel for every time somebody came in with a good idea. And I remember Phil cut him off, and he said, hold on, you haven't heard this one. And as I began to draw out the systems diagram of the water cubes and how they could work to create water, food, and energy in a singular integrated system, I'll never forget Jason rocked back in his seat. I could still hear the squeaking of this, the hinge. And he said, that's probably one of the best ideas I've ever seen. And I'd be willing to invest $250,000 today in that company. And we never took that investment. But what happened that day is that Genesis Systems came into being. And, there's a greater power at work in the cosmos. If you need evidence of God, look no further than the quantum realm to understand the evidence is all around us. And so to me, our Creator is very active in the affairs of men, throughout history, and is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so to me, this was maybe a momentary intervention where he just peeled back the veil just a little bit to let me understand what might be coming and what we might need to do to prepare, and how we can help each other. And so as Phil came in on the founding team, and many others, and even you yourself, Steve, were involved at a point. Many people have shouldered the burden along the way to get this to where it is today. And it's extraordinary, and I can certainly unpack it. But today, WaterCube, which is the technology, is essentially a waterless well that efficiently creates water almost anywhere in the world outside the polar regions, enough to use for a household or an entire data center. This is a revolutionary form of water, and there are some steps beyond it that we're really excited about. But it is safe to say that right now, as I stand here and I speak to you right outside the DFW airport, that we are about 4.4 billion people in absolute water scarcity. And that's half of us. And we perish in 3 days without water. And as I stand here in Texas, Corpus Christi is down to 8% water supply. And worldwide, 38 of the largest 100 cities worldwide are running out of water. And I can't help but think that fate, God, somebody knew what was coming and has allowed us to begin to kind of prepare for the things that we need to do to ensure our health, our wellness, and our survival. And there are things beyond this. As I listen to the Artemis astronauts look back from, their distant travel, they're breaking all kinds of records. It's fascinating, but I think one of the most interesting comments you continue to hear as a thematic from astronauts is this, overview effect. Look at the vastness of the cosmos and how unique it is that we can live here and abide on planet Earth uniquely. The conditions are just right. And so as we increase the number of us, we don't need to prune, if you will, the human tree. That's not for us to play God. We need to enable our survival. We need to enable our wellness. And there are some challenges that we have ahead of us that we need to prepare for And some of those challenges mean that we've got to do some things off planet. And we now have the technologies to do that and the imperative.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. One thing as we go into the next stage of this, I want you also not to miss your flight, because I know that you're dealing with a lot right now. But one of the books that I've asked people to read is this one right here called Cadillac Desert, and I think for me it describes how we as an American society have been trapped into a water solution that is unsustainable and that is killing our planet. It shows how how quickly big money and big politics can grab for the value of water that people need for growing crops and feeding their families in ways that become destructive. It just gives them a background. But I wouldn't mind you talking a little bit more about the nature of the problem, because for me, growing up in Africa, I'm going to show a picture now for our listeners that is a little disturbing, but this is a few hundred miles from where I grew up, and it is real. We in America do not feel this because we live in abundance. But even though there are more people living in security, prosperity, and peace and health than ever before, because there's 8 billion plus people, there are many people living like this. And this is the picture that's disturbing. But this is one of God's children, and there are millions of them that live without adequate water, without adequate food, in environments like this, without adequate shelter. And it is something within the reach of the human race to solve, and we have not solved it. And the Cadillac Desert book kind of describes why we get trapped in these things. But this problem is even worse. For example, people in India, one of the engineers that you've hired has lifetime problems with health, because they had to drink and bathe in a river that was polluted from upstream. There was no other choice. They had to drink the water or they would die. And 50% of the illnesses on planet Earth are caused because of a lack of clean, adequate water. When you describe the nature of the problem here, Dave, to Americans who have never seen these kind of things or lived in these kind of places, how do you describe this vision where America can be the shining city on the hill to lead the rest of the world into a future of abundance and not a future of scarcity?
Thanks for framing it for me, Steve. But, first and foremost, I know this touches the heart of God. And if we're in touch with God, then it has to touch our hearts. I know that, the creator I serve is not a respecter of persons, and he doesn't love any one of us with more fondness than the other. It's like a father with his children, or mother with, her daughters. She loves them all the same and would give her life and lay down their life for them. And certainly he did that for us, which is part of the miracle of my faith. Certainly that God, the creator that created all of this, he stepped out of eternity into time, and he laid down his life as a human for us. And so as we look at, what is our mandate as a human race, what can we do when we have the resources, the knowledge, the network to reach into these problems? Can we not but solve them? And this morning I had a breakfast with some businessmen here in Dallas, and these were true men of character. They're American men who want to intervene. And I remember telling them that within just the northern Texas area, there are literally billions of dollars stored up that is ready to be let into efforts and work to mitigate human suffering. And I said to them, it is time to go from storing vessels to pouring vessels, because the world is looking at the United States. And if we can be ambassadors and diplomats of water and kindness, we will generate such gratitude and such goodwill toward the United States that it will generate, much like we did during World War II, a peace dividend, a goodwill dividend. And I think that we owe it to future generations to use our talents and our expertise to do this when it is within our power. And it is within our power. And so there are some things that just very quickly I'll frame out within the food supply that I'm extraordinarily concerned about. And I became aware of these when I was flying in Air Force Special Operations. Back in 2011, I was stationed at Cannon Air Force Base. And I was sitting in the barber shop listening to the farmers chatter and getting ready to take the seat myself, sitting there in a flight suit. And I remember a figure that stuck out in my mind, but the farmers were talking about the rate at which wells dried up every day. And I've told this story oftentimes, but it made a profound impact on me because I went and I did the math, and they said that wells that support 150 acres or 100 acres of cropland were growing up. I'm sorry, they were running out at the rate of 30 to 50 a day. And if you do the math, you realize, oh my goodness, that's almost 10,000 acres every day we lose in that part of the country to grow on. And so as I began to look at the water supplies that we pump up from the ground, and a great source of knowledge on this is the Gravity Research and Climate Experiment from NASA's JPL. And the two satellites that they had for almost 20 years that went pole to pole measuring Earth's magnetic field twice a day show you what the ground disappearance of water looks like. It's called continental drying. And you can literally see the change in physical gravity occurring underground from the pumping out of this water supply. And so increasingly in areas such as the Texas Panhandle, the area of the Permian Basin, what we call the High Plains Aquifer, Ogallala Aquifer, that's the breadbasket of the world, and we support 100 countries with that food production. Well, right now, those water levels are dropping. And you can see in the index wells, the numbers are tremendous in terms of the depletion, because they're taking out water not only for energy exploration and fracking, but to a great extent to grow crops. And so this food with energy is increasingly in competition, and we have to look at what happens when this water supply is gone. And Texas is about to recognize a true crisis. Now, many in government already recognize it, certainly the folks involved down in Corpus Christi, even though it is on a coastal area, they can't desalinate fast enough. They tried to build another plant. They couldn't get it accomplished, and now the entire area is in crisis. And these images are from Grace. So now we're clamoring for what to do. Genesis began to almost a decade ago for what to do. And so we're in a very unique position as a company to have not only a portfolio of about 90 separate patents and trade secrets, but we have the only capability in the world. We're it. We can take water from air, the fast side of the water cycle, and we can create utility scale water supplies up to millions and tens of millions of gallons per day from air. And the reason this works is because all of the water that is in the air is equivalent to about 37 quadrillion tons of water. It's 2.5 times of all lakes, but rivers, tributaries, and streams in the world. And it goes up and out of the atmosphere every 8 days. So to put this in perspective, the amount of water that is, if you're standing in front of Epcot at Disney, in front of that big sphere, 600 billion of those spheres are moving in and out of the atmosphere every 8 days. And so what we want to do is we want to capture that at high efficiency and put it where we need it. We want to put it to work for humanity, for the families who are like the ones we just met with up in Maui on the Hawaiian Islands. Been waiting 10 years for a connection to a water supply from the county. It was one of the air traffic controllers, and spending his weekends moving water back and forth to their little 5-acre plot and their animals. And now with one WaterCube, they go to the sky for their water and bring that water vapor in, and they have their time back. So those are the kinds of folks we're solving problems for. And increasingly now we're seeing applications of the technology in rural Africa, where we're supporting children's hospitals and things like that with the first fresh water supply they've ever had that is not contaminated. And now, even recently, as of last week, we saw our systems basically became combat tested as they enabled real world operations in the face of interruptions that occurred due to the drones and the missile strikes that Iran was conducting. These deliveries of water and other infrastructure became interrupted. And so we actually, as a result of sales to this military, SAW systems actually enable real world operations in that environment. And so those after action reports have made it back to the Pentagon. So we're very excited to see this technology coming in line and maturing. It is a fierce fight against the status quo. Something you taught me many, many years ago was to be fiercely and patiently persistent, and not to get rude, and not to get frustrated, but just continue the movement, however slow. And what you have right now is a very ossified system that the engineers that we train through our engineering centers of excellence, whether that's in Austin, at the University of Texas there, or even around the world, we're training those engineers with old thinking. And you were the head of the Air University, and you know what that's like, and you know how hard it is to dislodge that. Right. I think you stayed a little extra long in your tenure at Air University to make sure that you broke that, hole to make sure fresh thinking got in. And so we see this now, and this old thinking is tied almost to Roman architecture, to a Roman way of doing business, moving heavy water, moving large infrastructure projects into place. And what we really need to be doing is allowing the air to be the conduit to move that water for us. And then we need to say, okay, I want the water supply here. And so the WaterCube represents a device like a water router. And that router, we can say, okay, make water here and in the amount we need. And the energy sources that we can use for it are increasingly flexible. We like to say it's energy agnostic. And I'll say it on your show, we would like to be the first terrestrial ground infrastructure to use space-based solar, because it just makes sense for what we're doing. The cost of electricity and that kind of infrastructure is increasingly becoming untenable, especially for the areas that are economically challenged.
Oh, that's a wonderful lead in to a couple of questions in the chat. One is, and as you're answering this question, I'm going to bring up the video of the gentleman that has one of your water cubes in Hawaii, because what's ironic is that most of the places where people are dying of thirst are in the equator belt, where the humidity is oppressive, meaning there's so much more water in the air that it is oppressive, yet the water is not in a form that can be consumed by humans or by plants. So as you're answering the question of what kind of humidity levels, how austere can you be, how much water can you pull out of the air? I'm going to bring up the video of the Hawaii example, because they have a lot of humidity there. And then the second question, after you answer that and talk to the video, is the sustainability, where most people don't realize that the ocean is the engine, the pump that not only exerts water into the air through evaporation, but sucks water out of the air to maintain the balance of humidity globally. And that when you take a gallon of water out of the air anywhere on the planet, it is replenished in minutes, depending on where you are at. So why don't you answer the question of what kind of ranges of humidity and temperature does this work? What kind of water can you get, which you've already addressed, tens, hundreds, millions of gallons, depending on the size. And then we'll talk a little more about sustainability in the hydraulic cycle.
Well, we're very pleased to say that, we surpass EPA standards for water quality by about 100x. In fact, the U.S. Army's 8th Theater Sustainment Command out in the Pacific recently did all the water testing, and we're the first system that makes water like this to pass the most rigorous gold standard for the Department of Defense in terms of water quality. So obviously, volume is not a concern for us.
WaterCube is
Keep going. Sorry.
Okay, we can let that play. But one of the big things for us is to make sure that we're creating the amount of water that folks need in a way that they need it. And so we call it water your way. We don't want to make you too much. We don't want to make you too little. So, we look at where you are. We have a tool that we've developed. It's a little bit like a simulator, but it is able to run based on 10 years of historic weather data for the entire world. And if I have a latitude and a longitude for you, I can know exactly how much water you are going to make at the location where you are in every given month. And so we're using this tool every day for, islands, inland areas, you name it, to make sure that folks can make water where they need it and the amount they need it. Now, our technologies kind of run the gamut. So there are different ways to create water from air. Some of the technologies that we're pioneering probably put us in Nobel territory. They are liquids that have an extremely high affinity for water that can essentially capture with almost no energy and release equally with almost no energy. Now, that can't be said for other types of materials, because when you have a high affinity for water, it's typically very difficult to get that molecular bond to let loose. If it loves the water, it doesn't want to release the water. We have some switches that can turn that off and on. And those are very, very exciting, because what that means is that the energetics of this are getting so low, we're already in a lot of areas competitive with the cost of tap water or municipal water. So with the essentially testing of these at lab scale, we were able to get down into very low humidity ranges. We've seen as low as 10, 15%, and then certainly we can operate all the way up to saturation. So we run the gamut. Now, where you typically struggle just because of physics is in very cold regions. So below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to have less water in the air because the molecules are closer together. So you want to try to keep above 50.
Yeah, that's good for the kind of the parameters. Let me play this video, because here's a video of somebody in Hawaii, and you might think, well, oh, they're in Hawaii, there's plenty of water. It's very humid, but the reality is that island nations do not have good drinking water. Hawaii is not just one of them, but literally the billions of people that live in Indonesia, Micronesia, Malaysia islands, in the Indo-Pacific region suffer from water. Even though there's a lot of rain, the water runs right into the ocean. It is not collected. There's not the aquifers or the rivers or the lakes that we have in America. And it is a tragic water scarcity region that needs to be served by this. So let me play this video, because this is Hawaii, but you can talk a little bit, Dave, about why this is good and why Hawaii has a real water problem, even though people might not realize.
About WaterCube is because it makes water out of the air and out of the atmosphere, and we live in a very saturated area. I know I'm going to get great water out of it, and I don't have to worry about the groundwater. I don't have to worry about rain catching. I can literally just look up in the sky and know that I'm making water.
All right, Dave, comments on that?
So in this particular, in this particular area, this is on the island of Maui. The waiting list to connect to a physical water supply in most of the area on the edge of the city, believe it or not, is 20 years. And so there are many properties that don't have access to groundwater. The seasonal rains that many island nations, in fact, this is happening throughout most of the world, but the seasonal rains that used to be able to be counted on for rain collection or capture, you could purify that water and use it. Well, that's just not an option anymore because it's not reliable. So in this case, you can basically have a life hack with a WaterCube and produce the water you need to meet need. So again, it does. A lot of the watershed, the rain that is hitting those islands is not actually going into the ground. In some areas, about up to 70% is just moving off into the salt water.
Yeah. So one of the questions in the chat is one that you'll really enjoy answering, because you fought the bureaucracy where the government wants to tax everything. One of the stories people may not know is that Elon Musk asked you to build a 10 million gallon a day system in Boca Chica to cool down his launch pad. And the state of Texas said, well, first of all, how do we tax that? And second of all, you're denied because we need to do a 10-year study to see if it's truly detrimental to the environment, which all those studies have been done. We can talk about that in a minute. But the question in the chat is, Colorado and Oregon have outlawed rain catching. Why won't they outlaw this as well? Dave?
Well, they can certainly try. But you can run it in your attic and have a vent to outside, and it's really your business what happens inside your home. We've been conditioned in the United States to ask government, "Mother, may I?" And the last I checked, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We don't have to ask permission. And so the tail wagging the dog, if you will, asking government permission to sustain our lives in a smart, intelligent, and responsible way is a silly proposition. So if this ever goes to the courts and the SCOTUS, I look forward to, it'll be like the Michael Jackson meme with the guy with the popcorn. When you start to tax my air, that's a tyrannical government, and that's probably the kind that our founders said, you've got to cast that off.
Yeah, no, and it's like in the Bible, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, give unto God what is God. So there is some tax for, drainage and cleaning of water that's been used, whether it's for the toilet or the shower, so there's a balance there. But, you're right.
Sure. And the tax they'll receive is on the sale. It can be, there are different ways. But at the end of the day, to tax air as a feedstock is not something that we see as viable. In addition, let's take a look at data centers. We're putting up 800 billion gallons of water a year worldwide in terms of water vapor. This is a greenhouse gas that is actually trapping more heat because water is a heat holder in our atmosphere. And so when we actually collect this, it helps us. It draws things back into balance in the right direction, in addition to other things that we can do.
So this is to the next question of, won't this damage the weather if we start pulling water out of the air? And if you want to talk to this, where Mother Nature has really designed what is looking to be the perfect solution for humans, where the same amount of water has been on the planet for the last 100 million years, and it's just in a cycle. And how God accelerates the cycle when we draw it out of the air. Why don't you talk to that a little bit, Dave?
All right. So essentially, we have a slow side and a fast side of this water cycle, the hydraulic cycle. And think of Earth as being in a snow globe. And since antiquity, we've always thought about, putting that water in our faucet by tapping into the sloshy stuff, the stuff that's already condensated. But in many cases, civilizations for eons have used rain nets and other ways of water harvesting to, allow their civilizations to thrive. And so we can borrow some of those ideas from Mesoamerican cultures, right, who have done this before. However, what's interesting is what we've done is kind of create a router where we move that into your backyard or behind your facility or behind the fence and says, here's your water supply, own your water, take control of your life rather than letting someone else take control of you. And to what you alluded to a minute ago, which is that increasingly water police arrests are being made. There's a case some time back about a gentleman who was collecting rainwater on his own land, who was arrested on multiple misdemeanor charges because in Oregon, the rainwater actually belongs to the state, or it's a commons. So, in this hydraulic cycle, we have a lot of water vapor, as I mentioned earlier, that is up there. It's about 37 quadrillion tons, according to NOAA, at any given moment. And the sunlight and the ocean are always keeping it in equilibrium. And so we've done the math on this. Somebody might go check the math, and I would love to have it. So go put the supercomputers to work. But from the guys at MIT and Stanford who did the math on this, to take all of humanity's water from the air, because it's replenishing every 8 days, would be kind of the statistical equivalent of going down to the ocean, putting your foot in the water, and kind of being concerned about sea level rise. So it's almost infinitesimal, the impact it would have. But in addition, we have a lot of extra water vapor going in as changes happen to our world. And this continental drying is something we've seen before, and it wasn't necessarily driven by human change, right? So, for example, you can find fossil evidence where the Tigris, Euphrates, and other rivers once converged. Some of those rivers are gone. We know that the Fertile Crescent was once more even more fertile than it is now, and even held jungles and forests. Where are they? Continental drying occurred. Climate patterns change, and we have to adapt with it. And so we don't really look at a sustainable technology as something that is necessarily political. We just think it's good stewardship, right? The Americans have the legend of Johnny Appleseed, which is a basis, of course, in fact. But the idea of leaving things better than we found it for successive generations has always been kind of part of our DNA and our way of thinking. And it's a responsible way of thinking. And we've got to get back to that, because kind of the locust mindset of consuming everything we have access to because it serves me right now, that's irresponsible. So as we get into a better thinking and a better mindset, now we bring space into the equation. How can we maybe not burn as many fossil fuels, and perhaps bring some space-based solar power or energy into the equation, right? How can we begin to create, as you've put it before, lifeboats in space by taking things off planet? And that's something I'm working on with a number of folks, and would love to tell you about it.
Yeah, so we can talk about that, and because this is really ultimately about the fact that the space revolution is unlocking the keys to multiple problems on Earth that we have not yet been able to solve, and food and water are at the top of that priority list for all of humanity. And so we're happy to talk about that, because ultimately what we're talking about for people that are watching here is, when you can build this kind of infrastructure in space, where you can have multiple solar panels receiving the sun's infinite power, converting it into radio waves and beaming it to any water cube anywhere on the planet for abundant water. Now you actually also have abundant energy, because it's not just the energy to power the Genesis systems. There's so much excess energy. You can now power the electricity, the heating, the air conditioning. And that energy and that water now can grow food in ways that really start transforming the entire landscape of the scourge of hunger and thirst that we have on our planet. And there are other applications. So Dave, if you want to talk about the food piece of it, or if you want to talk about
I'd love to.
And then the transcendence part of it, if you would.
Well, they're both connected. And so let me start by just framing the food challenge. And I'm going to do this very quickly. Imagine a scenario where we have now 8 billion people on Earth. Everyone is seeking a better quality of life and kind of trying to aspire to that Western ideal. I don't think there's anything wrong with that personally. But when we look at the strain on the food supply, when we look at the fact that about 1.4% of Americans are now actually involved in agriculture or growing, our food, down from 40% back in the 1930s and 40s, that's a big change. And so what has enabled us to do that with such a small percentage of the population is our technology. And so we have, massive harvesters. We, irrigate hundreds of acres through a single pump, moving water up from underground. But those pump supplies are drying out, those underground lakes. They take hundreds of years to recharge. Across Texas, there's probably a decade left on the water, if not less. We already see wells drying up because the water tables are falling. And so when you look at it in totality, what you have is essentially a condition where, based on my research, you've got to grow about 80% more food globally with 40 to 50% less water available. How do you do that? The numbers are going the wrong way. Water in open irrigation is wasted, right? You lose about 40% to runoff and about 40% to wind drift and evaporation. So 80% of the water used in open field irrigation is immediately wasted. So we have to figure out better ways to grow. Now, in some ways, the bigs, I won't mention names because I don't know who your sponsors are, but let's just say the bigs have begun to hybridize food, and we've all enjoyed some upside to that, right? Better grain harvests and maybe strains of wheat or fruits and vegetables that are more resistant to certain kinds of bugs and parasites. But we also have a problem, because what we lose when we do the HMO or the GMO foods and the genetic hybridization is we lose hybrid vigor. You lose the hardiness of that food. And so back in 2018 and 19, there was extensive dialogue. In fact, it was right after your tenure, you had gone on to command at Air Education Training Command. A group of colonels and I went to sit down with the Global Crop Trust, and we entered in a series of meetings. And we learned there that we've lost about 80% of our genetic biodiversity, right? Let's say there were, 200 varieties of apple now. We've got a fraction of that. There used to be 50 varieties of turnip. We've got 10 varieties left, for example. So they have a whole book. It's about this thick on how many genetic strains we've lost. And the need for protecting those seeds is absolute, right? If something happens to those wild strains, the original genetic material, whether it's climatological, if it's pest or insect driven, if it's whatever it is, we may need to reach back into those to have that blueprint so that we can reinvigorate. And so starting in very recent memory, seed vaults around the world have become compromised or destroyed. The seed vault in Aleppo, Syria was destroyed. One of the last drought-resistant strains of wheat was lost to that, area of the world, and they had to pull that out of the Svalbard vault, about 100,000 seeds to reconstitute it, or it would have been extinct. But as we look at the security of these terrestrial-based seed vaults, they're increasingly vulnerable. And we did the security assessment on the Svalbard vault, and we discovered an extraordinary vulnerability, not only from glacial melting and other things, but also man-made, right? So I admittedly, and I'm not sycophantic, I've spoken truth to power, and it's cost me. But I will tell you that, Steve, you inspired me many, many years ago because I was sitting in the big blue bedroom at Air University, and you said something that stuck with me. And you said, we need to create lifeboats in space and things off-world that give us the ability to reach back and to have a second chance. And we owe it to ourselves to create that insurance policy. So based on that effort that was started in 2018-19, it stalled because we were building a consortium with Global Crop Trust and others to basically put a seed vault on the moon so that we could reach back if we ever had to get that genetic material and bring that back to Earth or sustain ourselves in colonization, whatever it looked like. And we had done the analysis on the lunar surface. We had looked at the depth we needed to put the seeds for the perfect storage temperature. We had looked at lunar tremors, being able to keep those seeds viable, what varieties would go. It was an extraordinary effort. And then it stalled because there was a desire to bring America's strategic competitors, the competitors of freedom, into that mix. And one of those competitors at the time was China. And those of us who were involved said this would be a mistake if we bring them in because their interests are not always aligned with ours. This needs to be uniquely ours. So the effort stalled, and recently we have reconvened that effort and begun to bring that back. And so if you go to lunarvault.org right now, you can read about the history of the effort, which you inspired. And we don't have any of the team up who is involved with this because we're kind of keeping it close hold. But we want the right team members involved. We want the right technologies involved to create a second chance for humanity if this genetic material ever becomes compromised, because once it's gone, and we owe ourselves that safety.
Well, Dave, I want to thank you. A couple of the people in the chat have asked some very, very good questions that I know you've heard 1,000 times before, and they revolve around the amount of energy required to get the water out of the air, around safety of the radio waves from space to power things on Earth. Those all have technical answers that make it safer than getting in your car and driving on the freeway. And in fact, much, much safer than that. But why don't you talk to us a little bit about the scaling reality of this, where the more water you make, the cheaper it gets per kilowatt hour per gallon.
Yeah, I will. And with that, I want to acknowledge my phone because of battery. Thank you, Apple. Draining pretty fast. So with that, we have discovered a way to scale, and it's not linear. And so it involves the use of liquids. And just like a large refinery or plant, using columns, we're able to be very, very efficient. And as we scale, that nonlinear upward production really lowers the cost of water. And again, from where we are today in our WaterCubes that are for sale, you can go buy them on Amazon or direct through the company as the OEM. We are able to move toward about 100x lower energy than we're at today. And that becomes very exciting because our technical objective as a corporation at Genesis Systems is to create the lowest cost produced water on Earth. And our vision is to solve the water, food, energy nexus. And we know that what we are doing connects to food so tightly because water is food and food is water.
No, absolutely, Dave. Well, I know you also have a flight to catch, and I just appreciate this audience getting to meet one of the mighty men of our age who is building the next generation of capability and technology to uplift the human condition, and smart enough to be able to navigate the deep state, the bureaucracy, the regulatory statutory environment that tries to cling to the past and not let the pioneers of the future, reach for the stars. So thank you for unlocking the space revolution to power water solutions on Earth. And the one thing Dave didn't talk about, but his system is the system that will monitor, that will manage the water systems in any space habitat. For example, the Earth is a spaceship, and on the Earth, there's the same amount of water that's ever been, and it's either in the ocean, the ice caps, the air, your body, or the plants. And in space, in a spaceship, you tell me how many people you need to travel, and we'll tell you how much dirt you need, how much water you need, and then that water will be in the state of protecting you from radiation and then feeding the humidity in the air, drawing out of that air into drinking water for your plants, your animals, yourself, then being cleaned and put back into protecting you. That'll be the water cycle in space habitations in the future based on the same technology you just saw in Hawaii for that man that bought it off of Amazon. So Dave, thank you for being a multidisciplinary problem solver and a pioneer in technology and in leadership. We wish you well, and thank you for sharing your vision with the rest of this community. These are American patriots that will help invest and move forward this reality that the government works for us. We do not work for the government. And I know you believe that and have lived it. And we're going to get this back in the way George Washington and our founding fathers intended.
I am excited about the future, Steve, and I do not default towards despair or hopelessness. The future is bright. God has given us the ability to do something about it, and He's, inspiring and moving people who care about our future and future generations to action. And I'm just really excited to be around so many great folks and this community of people. Thank you for having me on and for the opportunity to share this vision and what we're doing here at Genesis. And there's much more to come, so stay tuned.
Okay, well, Dr. Stuckenberg, we've got your back, and thank you, and travel safe.
Thank you, Steve. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
In a quiet town at where beards grow wild and lips dare to crack without permission, one woman has suffered.
Hi, I'm Margie, and I'm Jadriet's mother.
But the world would come to know her by another name, Madame Margie, the moistureless.
Jay came home with a lip balm. It's called Soft Disclosure.
With one miraculous application, her power awakened.
Within one day, my lips were healed. It was miraculous.
But salvation came at a cost. For in the shadowed lands known only as Badlands,
You boys at Badlands are so handsome.
she saw potential,
You're covering up your beautiful faces.
and she made her demand.
Shave them all off,
Or face the consequences. Beard oil will not save you now.
and you'll look so much better.
This summer, moisturize wisely and guard your beard, because Madame Margie, the moistureless, is always watching.
Patriots, the fight for truth doesn't stop at the screen. It's hitting the road again. Badlands Media is rolling into Nashville on April 9th through 12th for the next stop on the Great American Restoration Tour. Join your favorite Badlands hosts and like-minded Americans for 3 powerful days. Packed with unfiltered discussions, deep dive panels, and real debate. Hear the raw truth, ask the tough questions. No topic too hot, no question too bold. GART is where our community comes alive. Tickets are on sale now at badlandsmedia.tv/GART, where you can also grab a virtual pass and watch from home. Join us to question narratives and fight for America's future. Nashville is calling. The restoration continues. Get your passes today. See you in Music City.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.